For decades, colossal and merciless forces, ferocious European regulators, predatory hedge fund operators, and the ancient, unforgiving aristocracy of German industrial capital made the exact same fatal error when analyzing Porsche. They assumed it was merely a boutique manufacturer of expensive toys for the ultra-wealthy, a charming, overpriced relic of Stuttgart's automotive nostalgia, incapable of threatening the established continental order. But let us examine the carnage that erupted across the global financial landscape. Volkswagen, a sprawling industrial colossus roughly 10 times the size of Porsche by annual revenue, sat comfortably at the summit of European manufacturing, shielded by government patronage and an unassailable market presence. Hedge funds across London, New York, and Geneva piled billions of dollars into short positions against Volkswagen shares, absolutely certain that the unfolding global financial crisis would decimate the bloated automaker. And the German state of Lower Saxony wielded a permanent 20% ownership stake in Volkswagen, a legislative fortress explicitly designed to prevent any hostile foreign or domestic predator from seizing control of the nation's most iconic industrial asset. Any other small, specialized automaker on the face of the earth would have accepted its modest, respectable position in the global pecking order. Any other boardroom in Stuttgart would have acknowledged the impossibility of a lightweight sports car company attempting to devour a titan that manufactured millions of vehicles annually across a dozen global brands, and quietly retreated to the safety of quarterly earnings reports and polished press releases. But instead of accepting their subordinate position in the industrial hierarchy, they engineered the unthinkable. They deployed a sophisticated arsenal of invisible financial derivatives, executed a covert accumulation campaign that baffled the entire European regulatory apparatus, and detonated the single most devastating short squeeze in the recorded history of global capital markets. A financial earthquake so violent it briefly crowned Volkswagen the most valuable company on the entire planet. This is the story of how Porsche weaponized the architecture of modern finance, turned the global derivatives market into a ruthless war of informational asymmetry, and learned that the line between conquering an empire and being consumed by its village is written in the blood of those who miscalculate. To understand the true depth and ancestral complexity of this corporate dynasty, we must rewind time far back, past the gleaming showrooms and the roar of flat-six engines, to the industrial twilight of interwar Europe. There is a deeply entrenched, carefully cultivated public mythology about the origins of this empire. The world prefers the seductive, harmless fairy tale of a small family of brilliant engineers, passionate about speed and mechanical elegance, who simply wanted to build beautiful automobiles for discerning enthusiasts. This is a profound historical distortion. The Porsche dynasty was forged in the crucible of 20th century power politics. Ferdinand Porsche, the patriarch, established his engineering consultancy in Stuttgart in 1931. But his defining achievement was not building a sports car. It was designing the Volkswagen Beetle, the so-called people's car, commissioned directly by the German government in 1934 as an instrument of national industrial ambition. The man who created Porsche also created Volkswagen. These two corporate bloodlines were never separate entities existing in peaceful coexistence. They were born from the same genetic code, entangled in a web of shared technology, shared family lineage, and shared imperial ambition. The Porsche and Piëch families, descendants of the original patriarch, would eventually hold positions of immense power across both companies simultaneously, creating one of the most complex, incestuous corporate power structures the European continent had ever witnessed. Understanding this ancestral entanglement is absolutely critical, because the hostile takeover that would erupt decades later was not merely a financial transaction. It was a family inheritance dispute disguised as a corporate acquisition, fought with derivatives instead of swords. The true weapon of this empire was never simply the engineering superiority of its vehicles, nor the cultural prestige of its racing heritage. Their ultimate devastating advantage was something entirely invisible to the outside world: an obsessive corporate culture of operational perfection, combined with a terrifying willingness to gamble the entire existence of the company village on a single audacious financial stratagem. In the early 1990s, Porsche was not a symbol of invincibility. It was dying. Annual sales had collapsed from over 50,000 vehicles in the mid-1980s to a catastrophic 14,000 units by 1993. The production lines were archaic, the models were aging, and the company was hemorrhaging capital at a rate that would have destroyed any ordinary manufacturer within months. Then a mechanical engineer named Wendelin Wiedeking ascended to the position of chief executive officer. He did not arrive with a conventional rescue plan. He arrived with a scalpel and a philosophy stolen directly from the factory floors of Japan. He imported Toyota's legendary lean manufacturing system, ruthlessly slaughtered unprofitable model lines, physically ordered the factory storage shelves to be cut in half to eliminate wasteful inventory, and introduced the Boxster and the Cayenne, two vehicles that purists despised, but that generated staggering rivers of profit. Within a decade, he had transformed a dying relic luxury car into a masterpiece, into the single most profitable automobile manufacturer per unit on the planet. And it was precisely this intoxicating, unprecedented profitability that planted the seed of the most ambitious, reckless, and ultimately catastrophic corporate assault in European financial history. Wiedeking did not simply want to manage a profitable niche automaker. He wanted dominion. He wanted the absolute power over the industry. By 2005, Porsche announced its intention to acquire a 20% stake in Volkswagen, publicly claiming the investment was purely strategic, a protective measure to prevent hostile forces from dismantling the larger company. The global market accepted this explanation without suspicion. After all, what rational mind could conceive of a sports car manufacturer attempting to swallow an industrial leviathan 10 times its size? It was the equivalent of a piranha announcing its intention to consume a whale. The financial establishment dismissed it as a defensive play and moved on to other concerns. But behind the closed doors of Porsche's Stuttgart headquarters, an entirely different operation was unfolding. Wiedeking and his chief financial officer, Holger Herter, had quietly constructed one of the most sophisticated financial traps in modern history. Instead of purchasing Volkswagen shares openly on the market, which would have immediately alerted regulators and driven the stock price upward, they deployed an arcane financial instrument known as cash-settled options. These derivatives allowed Porsche to gain massive economic exposure to Volkswagen stock without triggering the mandatory disclosure requirements of European securities law. They were building a hidden empire of phantom ownership, invisible to regulators, invisible to competitors, and most critically, invisible to the thousands of hedge fund managers who were simultaneously betting billions of dollars that Volkswagen shares would collapse. For 3 years, this covert accumulation continued in absolute silence. Porsche repeatedly denied publicly and categorically any intention of launching a full hostile takeover. They lied to the press. They lied to the analysts. They lied to the entire architecture of global financial oversight. And the hedge funds believed them, continuing to pile into enormous short positions, borrowing Volkswagen shares and selling them into the market, utterly convinced that the collapsing global economy of 2008 would drag the automaker's valuation into the abyss. Then came the detonation. On Sunday, the 26th of October 2008, Porsche issued a single devastating public announcement. They revealed that they held 42.6% of Volkswagen's ordinary shares through direct ownership and an additional 31.5% through cash-settled options, totaling a staggering 74.1% of the entire company. Combined with the 20% held permanently by the German state of Lower Saxony, this meant that less than 6% of Volkswagen shares were available for free trading on the open market. And yet hedge funds had shorted more than 13% of the outstanding shares. The mathematics were apocalyptic. There were simply not enough shares in existence for the short sellers to cover their positions. The trap had been sprung. On Monday, the 27th of October, and Tuesday, the 28th, the most violent short squeeze in human financial history erupted across the trading floors of the world. Volkswagen shares, which had been trading at roughly 210 euros, detonated vertically to over 1,000 euros per share in a matter of hours. For a brief surreal moment during that chaos, Volkswagen became the most valuable company on the entire planet, surpassing even the mighty ExxonMobil. Hedge funds across 3 continents were obliterated. The estimated losses reached into the tens of billions of dollars. Traders were physically screaming on the floors of London and Frankfurt, powerless to stop the mathematical annihilation. But here is where the ultimate devastating irony of this entire saga reveals itself. The architect of the greatest financial trap in modern European history had unknowingly constructed his own coffin. To finance the covert accumulation of Volkswagen shares and options, Porsche had consumed approximately 10 billion euros in debt. The plan relied on one critical assumption, that by reaching the 75% ownership threshold, Porsche would gain legal access to Volkswagen's massive cash reserves and use them to pay down its own crippling obligations. But they fell agonizingly short of that threshold. At 74.1%, they were tantalizingly close, luxury counters, yet legally locked out of the treasury they desperately needed. And then the global financial crisis detonated with full force. Credit markets froze. Banks refused to refinance Porsche's mountainous debt. The sports car company that had tried to swallow the whale was now choking on the bones. Financial analysts began to describe Porsche not as an automaker, but as a hedge fund with a car company attached. And that hedge fund was now bankrupt. The family dynasty that had dreamed of reuniting the two empires, descended by their common patriarch, now turned on itself. Ferdinand Piëch, the grandson of Ferdinand Porsche, and the chairman of Volkswagen's supervisory board, maneuvered with cold surgical precision against the very executives who had launched the takeover in his family's name. In July of 2009, Wendelin Wiedeking and Holger Herter were expelled from the company. Wiedeking, the man who had single-handedly resurrected Porsche from certain death in the 1990s, was cast out with a controversial 50 million euro severance package that the German press immediately condemned as a reward for catastrophic failure. Criminal charges of market manipulation were filed against both former executives, though a German court would ultimately acquit them in March of 2016, ruling that the prosecution had failed to prove intentional deception. The reversal was absolute and merciless. By 2009, Volkswagen stepped in not as the conquered, but as the rescuer. The predator had become the prey. Volkswagen acquired an initial 49.9% stake in Porsche's automotive business, and by August of 2012, it completed the full absorption, paying approximately 4.46 billion euros for the remaining shares. The company that had designed the people's car had devoured the company that had designed the people's car's creator. The prey had consumed the predator, and the Porsche brand became merely one jewel in the vast, multi-continental crown of the Volkswagen Group. Let us advance to the modern era. The ghost of Porsche's ambition did not vanish entirely. In September of 2022, Volkswagen executed the largest initial public offering in European history, listing Porsche on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange at a valuation of approximately 78 billion euros. The brand was reborn as a publicly traded entity, trading under the symbolic ticker P911, a defiant tribute to its most iconic creation. Meanwhile, Porsche Automobile Holding SE, the family-controlled entity that had orchestrated the original doomed takeover, still exists as the dominant shareholder of the entire Volkswagen Group, holding 53.3% of the voting rights. The family that failed to conquer the empire through financial warfare quietly achieved dominion through patient generational shareholding. And yet, even now, the empire is besieged. Volkswagen is drowning under the weight of over $32 billion in Dieselgate fines and settlements, facing new criminal proceedings in France, struggling against the electric vehicle revolution, and watching its once dominant position in the Chinese market erode under the relentless advance of local competitors. Porsche SE, sensing the fragility of its automotive fortress, has begun diversifying into the defense sector and venture capital, quietly transforming itself from an automotive holding company into a diversified investment platform. This was not merely a corporate restructuring. It was a declaration to the financial world. We will not be defined by the wreckage of the past. We will reshape our identity as many times as necessary to ensure our bloodline endures. Today we are confronted with two irreconcilable visions of this dynasty locked in eternal conflict. On one side stands the terrifying specter of unchecked financial hubris, a cautionary tale of derivatives manipulation, corporate deception, and tens of billions of dollars in collateral destruction, inflicted upon the global financial system by a family that believed its ancestral birthright entitled it to absolute industrial dominion. On the other side stands the undeniable, romantic legacy of the most coveted automotive brand on the planet, the creator of machines that generations of enthusiasts worship. With an almost religious devotion, a family that has survived wars, financial crises, internal betrayals, and regulatory sieges across nearly a century of unbroken existence. They engineered the ultimate paradox of corporate survival, Even when their greatest gamble imploded with devastating consequences, they did not disappear. They absorbed the humiliation, restructured the wreckage, and methodically repositioned themselves at the center of the very empire they had failed to conquer by force. Because sometimes, hidden behind the elegant crest of Porsche, there is a quiet, invisible war. A war between the audacious disruptors they once dared to be, the entrenched dynasty they have become, and the question that the financial world still cannot answer. Did the piranha truly fail to swallow the whale, or did it simply learn to digest it from the inside?